I don't remember where I was when 1982 began. New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve 1981 into 1982. I'm not really sure where I was. My family had this tradition of we would watch the Dick Clark countdown, and then we would go out in the streets and bang pots and pans. That's how we celebrated the New Year. It was a big thing. We'd all pick the pan we wanted, and we'd get a big spoon, and we would go out in the street and bang the pots and pans and say and scream Happy New Year. We didn't have any of those little popper things. We didn't have fireworks. We didn't have anything like that. We had pots and pans, and that's pretty much how we did it. Now, when 1982 started, I was in the 5th grade. I was in Mrs. Durkin's class. She was one of those older teachers. I'm sure she's long since passed. Older teachers who was always a little bit nervous around the kids. She had one of those, this is Mrs. Durkin's class, and we're going to do our, this is 5th grade. You're still in the same room all day. And the what you're studying changes from hour to hour. In the morning it was reading and language, and then you had a little break, and then you came back and you did math, and then this and this and this. It was all in the same room. We hadn't started moving from room to room yet. And the only memory I have of Mrs. Durkin was that, and I've told this story on the show before, I used to wear one of my mother's varsity jackets. It was not a leather jacket. It was a cotton jacket, but it was from Tennessee. It said Tennessee Volunteers on it, or Tennessee High, and it was in horrible shape. It was nearly falling apart. It had holes in it. The lining was completely destroyed, and Mrs. Durkin was telling a story. There was a kid in my classroom. The worst kid I ever had was a kid who took his scissors and was actually cutting his jacket. So, of course, I cut my jacket. I got the scissors. I started cutting it. And I was like, oh, like this. And she got so pissed off at me. I ended up in the principal's office. My mother had to come down. It would not be the first time my mother came down. I'm pretty sure 5th grade was also the year we did that story where we had to write a creative story. There were no guidelines. So I took Star Wars and changed it into the students versus the teachers. And the teachers, instead of a Death Star, had their new ultimate weapon, which was the death principal. And with a single look, the principal could destroy a student. I was something like that. I don't know. But, there was battle scenes and stuff, and they brought my mother down and said, your son needs psychological help. He's writing about students and teachers battling it out. And she looked at it, and she looked at him, and she said, he likes Star Wars. This is a Star Wars reference. I'm not taking him for therapy. Are you out of your mind? My mother was quite the character, man. But she knew what was going on. But 5th grade, and I was putting this episode together in my head. I was thinking about 5th grade, or 1982 in general, and the two big things that come to mind from that time period, as far as daily life, because we'll get into the pop culture stuff, but daily life, the first thing that indicated to us that it was getting warmer, this would be early spring at school, is when the teacher would get that big stick out and walk over and unlock and open the top windows. I went to Loretta F. Lambton Elementary in Norwalk. There was no air conditioning. I don't know if do the schools have air conditioning now? They certainly didn't have it in 1982. And how you cooled the room was you could open the bottom windows, they slid up, and some of them pulled out, but the top ones all pulled out. You got this big stick, and you unlatched it, and then you pulled, and it would remember wind wings on cars? And it would open, click down, and that's how we knew it was getting warmer. The only drawback to that was occasionally a bird would fly into this classroom, and of course complete chaos would ensue with all of the kids screaming, there's a bird, oh my god, it's a bird, and the bird would either find its way back out, or in one case slam against the wall, and it killed itself. And that was traumatic for every kid in class, and every kid went home that day. Did you know that there was a bird died at school today? What? Yeah, a bird died. Came in the room and it crushed its skull, and these are all 10-year-olds, 9 and 10-year-olds. So for the majority of 1982, because my birthday is in September, for the majority of 1982, I was 10 years old, and my whole life was Star Wars. We're still a year and a half out from Return of the Jedi. Jedi wouldn't open until Memorial Weekend 1983. And, but life has to go on. There were 3 years back then between Star Wars movies. And you used that 3 years to collect as much as you could before the new movie came out and more stuff came out. They taught us on Empire Strikes Back, like, there's going to be a lot of toys. So you better save up birthdays and Christmases and whatever holidays you can dream up to get as much of this stuff. And then we all knew in 1983 there was going to be a huge onslaught of Star Wars toys. But again, that's a year away. Now, at this time, I had a few really good best friends. My closest friend was Carl Harmon, who I'm actually still friends with today on Facebook. I see him every once in a while. Truly my greatest friend growing up. Carl and I shared everything. Star Wars was our life. Everywhere we went, he was Han Solo when I was Luke Skywalker. He had the Han Solo blaster. I had the Luke Skywalker lightsaber. And that's just how life was. We had split the characters evenly. Each got the one they wanted, and we assumed those roles whenever we got together. I idolized Carl. Carl had the Space 1999 Eagle playset, which I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. My mother was never going to buy it for me because it was not Star Wars. But Carl's mom was a little different. She bought him basically whatever he wanted. And I was enamored of that, Again, I idolized Carl. Carl's mother was the person who put blue food coloring in the milk for us so we could have Luke's blue milk. Carl had a tree house in his backyard, which was really just a couple of boards up in a tree, but we would go up there and spend all day in that tree house. Carl's mom worked for 20th Century Fox, which I knew had something to do with Star Wars. So, again, he was the coolest guy, and he still is the coolest guy now. One of the coolest. He's in the 501st, his Stormtrooper armor. Carl is living the dream, man. Carl and I were so close that in the summer we lived at each other's houses. We took turns spending the night at each other's houses. When he spent the night at my house, this is so bizarre. My sister had a fox stuffed animal that was it was real lanky. It had a body, then it had like posable long limbs. And his name was very, very, very creative. His name was Foxy, like Forky in Toy Story. Now, Foxy sat in my sister's room. Whenever Carl wasn't there, Foxy was just a stuffed animal in my sister's room. I could care less about Foxy. I didn't want to play with Foxy. But when Carl came over, Carl imbued Foxy with life. And Foxy became this toy that we didn't fight over. We battled over who was going to get Foxy to play with. Foxy became Chewbacca. Foxy became every character we wanted to within the role play. And I can remember vividly when Carl would leave, Foxy's eyes would go dim. And my sister would take him and put him right back in her room. And I never had any desire on my own to play with the Foxy. When Carl wasn't there, Foxy was just a stuffed animal. And I find that so unusual. But that's the power of creativity, and the power, maybe even more power than creativity, the power of friendship and what friendship does to things. It imbues things with emotion and feeling. I don't know where Foxy is. Eventually, Foxy lost one of his limbs and had to be sewn back together. And I think eventually he simply fell apart. I'd love to see Foxy now. We bought a similar one at IKEA a few years back. But again, without Carl, it's just a stuffed animal. Now, when I would stay over the night at Carl's house, those were great nights because Carl was an only child, and Carl had a room full of Star Wars toys. And in the weird separation of things, for whatever reason, your friend always has the toys you don't have, and you have the he doesn't have. So when you get together, you have all the toys. And you pack for your overnight by packing your toothbrush, your shirt, your pajamas, and that's great. But the majority of time is spent packing which Star Wars figures are you going to take. And you had those collector cases. I had a lot of the Darth Vader cases, but the Darth Vader cases, when you closed them up, the figures all fell out. So you couldn't use that for taking places. That was only for display in your room. For taking places, you had to use the vinyl case because you could put the figure in the little trays, put the weapon next to them, close it up, and it wasn't going to come apart. And that was the beauty. I preferred those cases over the Darth Vader cases and over the C-3PO case. Even they made a case out of one of the laser rifles from Endor. Even that, when you close it up, the figures would fall out. So it's weird that the case that they made originally, the vinyl case, was the best case they had. And at one time I had 7 or 8 of them, all filled with figures. Time sort of takes all that away from you. Of a few things here and there, but nothing like the collection I had when I was 10. Because my mother would buy them at yard sales and such. But you pack those to go overnight to Carl's house, and you had to agonize over which to bring, because Carl had 2 Stormtroopers and I had 2, so now we had 4. Do I bring any of I had a couple of Battlestar Galactica figures that I had traded for. I didn't tell my mom. I had Imperious Leader, and I had a couple of Cylons, because the Cylons always hung out with the Stormtroopers because they were similar. But at Carl's house, I remember one particular overnight stay. How do you remember this? I was there for the Jerry Lewis telethon, and his mom was watching it because it was a constant stream of entertainment. And I remember asking her, well, we're going to go to bed now, so are they going to stop the telethon and then pick it up tomorrow? And she said, no, it runs all night. It's an all-night telethon. And that, I had no concept of that. That mystified me. They're going to be on TV all night? But Carl and I are going to play Star Wars in the bedroom and then go to bed. How can the telethon still be going on? Because remember back then, around 2 o'clock, the TV turned off. It played the national anthem and it went to static. This concludes our broadcast day. People don't even remember. That's only in the movies now. But Carl and I were such close friends. This is so funny. We used to play lightsabers in the bathroom with urine streams. That's hysterical, right? That's what you do when you're young. It's so funny to think of, and again, when I sit in my idle time and put this episode together in my head, I try to collate all the things that are from that time period. Leaving 5th grade, going into the summer, there was a big moment. The weird part about it was when summer hit, when Memorial Day weekend hit, I went to Carl's house, and I wonder if Carl even remembers this. Carl's mother had bought him one of those, is a keyboard, but it was more of an organ. I don't think they even make these anymore. They used to have these kid-sized organs that you plugged in, you turned them on, and they had a fan in them, and they would go, and then you could play the keys, and the air fan is what made the note. They were real rickety, because I got a few at yard sales when I was a kid, and the fan would try to get up to speed to make the notes, but it wouldn't work. Now, Carl had one that worked, and his mother had written on the keys how to play the Star Wars theme. Do, 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 do. I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen and heard. Oh my God. Carl's playing the Star Wars theme, and it's going boo doo doo doo. It's all breathy. And Carl finished playing the Star Wars theme, and he turned to me and he said, "Hey, Jeff, I went to the movies." "Oh, cool. What'd you see?" "I saw a movie that's better than Star Wars." And I looked at him and I said, "What you talking about, Willis?" He said, No, I saw this movie called E.T., and it's so good. It's better than Star Wars." I said, No. What are you talking about?" "Well, it's about this alien, and it comes to Earth, and it gets lost, and this kid finds him, and he's got Star Wars figures, and then the government wants him." And I'm like, whoa. At what point is it better than Star Wars? "Oh, Jeff, it's good." I was like, "Well, I'm not seeing that." "What do you mean?" "Well, if it's better than Star Wars, I ain't seeing it. Because ain't nothing better than Star Wars, so why am I going to waste my time?" And I remember feeling betrayed. I was betrayed by Carl. He likes this movie better than Star Wars. And then when E.T. toys started showing up, they weren't that great. They weren't as good as Star Wars toys. They had little PVCs, and they had a big one that you pulled the string and he talked, and they had one that was kind of posable, and one that was Elliot and E.T. on his bike, and you revved it up, and and like these are not Star Wars figures. There's no Millennium Falcon playset vehicle. There's no cantina. There's no Land of the Jawas. Were they going to make Elliot's house as a playset? And I thought, well, I just won't go see that movie. And then that'll be that. And so 1982 was also the year that all the drunks were living at my house. That's prime drunk era, where my mother had gone back to Tennessee. She had picked up her old high school boyfriend. He was a bum living next to a dumpster. And she brought him to California, and he brought a dozen of his friends. And I've talked about this on the show at length. We had Terry and GW and Charlie and Otis. I mean, we're just getting started. And Randy and Skeeter. We had all these people living in our house. One of them was in my room on the top bunk. We didn't have that big a house. So my mother, the saint that she was, she decided the summer of 1982, I was going to spend it with the relatives in Tennessee. I would go back to Tennessee and spend the summer. Now, I was used to going to summer camp. I went to summer camp for 2 weeks to either Wrightwood or Lazy W, Camp Lazy W. And I guess that was expensive. And my mother had used up a lot of tricks to get me to go there. I even went in 82 for winter camp, where you go up to Wrightwood and it's snowing. It was gorgeous. I spent a week in the snow at Wrightwood, drinking hot chocolate, singing gospel hymns because it was Bible camp. And I made a lot of memories there. And let me just back up a little bit. My mother worked full time. She was the only breadwinner of the house. Some of the drunks worked, but they didn't really contribute to the house. Occasionally, one of the drunks would take my mother to the store and load the cart up with groceries. This is back when Ralph's had plain wrap. Remember, the beer said beer, and the bleach said bleach with a blue stripe. And we would have a cabinet full of that stuff, with mostly beer, but other stuff too. But life was pretty expensive with that many people living in the house. When you open the refrigerator, everything in the refrigerator had a note on it. Kids' lunch, Jeff's lunch, Jennifer's lunch, don't eat. You know, there were cans of soda with our names on them. Then the drunks were not supposed to eat them. Now, if they did, we didn't know, because my mother wasn't going to tell us. But my mother did everything she could to shelter us. I think even though she was, quote-unquote, in love with Roger Dole Rogers, she knew that maybe this wasn't the greatest way to raise her children. And she did everything she could to shelter us. Now, my sister had her dad. And every weekend, she went off with Jerry to live with him, and sometimes longer than that. Now, I didn't have that. So I lived with the drunks. And so my mother would send me to Bible camp. Prior to 82, during the summer, my mother sent us to local Bible camp. And that's where every morning before she went to work, a bus would pick my sister and me up and take us to a church for a full day of Bible camp. Now, if you've never been to... Now, there's a difference between Bible camp and Bible day camp. Bible camp is Wrightwood, where I packed a suitcase and left for a week of hiking and, singing gospel songs and learning how to clean up after myself and serve people on KP, which is Kitchen Patrol. And that was fun. And you felt like you were out on your own. But Bible day camp is different. That's where you're taken to a church and you are preached to for about 8 hours. There's very little fun. There's a couple of recesses, but for the most part, it's basically like going to school, except there's a religious slant to it all. And I was raised religious, so I had no problem with any of that. The problem I had with it was the bus ride was really long because they had to pick up a lot of kids. And I was when I was younger, I was very prone to car sickness. So the ride to and from Bible day camp every day was a horrific journey of, am I going to vomit or not? And when you got to Bible day camp, you learned Onward Christian Soldiers and all of the other biblical songs. And the people there were nice. It was, the churches we went to were all really old buildings, so you just felt like you'd stepped into another century. The church that we went to on Sunday, the Methodist Church in Norwalk, was a pretty new building built in the 60s. And the churches that we went to for day camp, there wasn't Methodist day camp. I think it was Baptist day camp. So those buildings were like from the 30s, and they were really old. And, you go in the restroom and they had the trough. Instead of urinals, they had the trough, which is terrifying. And they had the powdered soap. Remember powdered soap? That metal rod sticking down, and you put your hand on it and slam it up so the powder will fall into your hand. And then when you're done, after you've used, basically Comet cleanser on your hand, you go to the towels. And the towels, this loop of fabric that you pull down, and it's supposed to clean it from the last guy that was there. So you dry your hands on it, but it's probably been there a year. I just saw one of those over here in Buena Park at the tire place. I took a picture of it, and I was like, they still make this? Isn't this how you get sick? Using a towel that somebody else has soiled? I know your hands are supposed to be clean, but you never really know what people are up to. And we went to Bible day camp because my mother had no alternative. There was no way no one was going to watch her kids during the summer. And I don't think she wanted to leave us alone all day unsupervised with a house full of drunks. So at least there was some semblance of responsibility. The final straw in Bible day camp was they would serve you a snack, and it was always something bizarre. It was like those those Danish butter cookies that come in a tin that nobody wants until there's nothing left in the house, and you go, well, I'll have the Danish butter cookies. They come in a little paper cup, they would serve those, and then they would serve us either water or lemonade. And I always drank the water because I didn't know what lemonade was. We didn't drink a lot of lemonade. We only drank tea at my house. Finally, someone said, no, it's like punch. Like, oh, well, you should have said something. I knew lemonade from cartoons. So I drank the lemonade, and it was the worst taste I'd ever had in my life. I said, you guys drink this? Why does it taste so bad? And one of the women at the church said, oh, there's no sugar in it, dear. What is it? Is it lemon water? No. It's sweetened with honey. Wait. You poured honey in the lemonade, and stirred it up thinking it was going to sweeten the lemonade. Does anybody do this anymore? Has anybody ever made lemonade with honey? Or was it like we were being experimented on? Because it was the worst thing I'd ever had in my life. It tasted like death, like a cup full of death. I said, I'd rather just go sing hymns, please. And we would go in and pick up the hymnal, and they'd go, turn to page 472 for, again, Onward Christian Soldiers is the one I vividly remember singing. The other thing was, I think it was our Methodist church and not the Baptist church. We had something called the New Bible, the Good News Bible, and it was a gold book that was the Bible, but it had cartoons in it, like little pictograms of people. On every 10th page, there'd be a little pictogram of some image from the Bible done in a little cartoony thing of and he shared the fish and loaves with them. And I would just sit in church and thumb through to find the cartoons and read those, which I guess worked because I've never forgotten those my whole life. When you're 9, 10, 11, 12, these are very impressionable years. These are the years that what happens is going to shape you as a person the rest of your life. So when summer came, summer 1982, my mother had to do something with me because she wasn't a teacher. She worked at Trojan Finance in Norwalk Square. She worked 9 to 5 every day. And my sister was, she's going to go to her father's house for the summer. What am I going to do? Am I going to stay at home and learn to be a drunk? Because they were willing to teach me how to. They did. They taught me how to play poker. They taught me how to play all these card games and how to bet and how to ante up. They taught me how to roll cigarettes. What was next? Teaching me how to drink, I guess. I was never going to drink, though. Not when I'd see them wake up, shaking, their hands, trembling, and their eyes literally bloodshot with thick rivers of red. I thought, that's got to be from drinking because nobody else does that. I'm never going to do that. There's no joy in that. But maybe my mother didn't know that. So, the summer of 1982, I was shipped off to Tennessee for the summer. I got in a car in the back seat of my godmother's car, Janet, and we drove from California to Tennessee. We drove in the heat of summer with no air conditioning, where there's no cell phones. I had no handheld video games. You either stared at the scenery or read a book, which I couldn't read a book in the car because I would get car sick. So sometimes I drew pictures, mostly Star Wars, or I stared at the sights. I had a box of crayons, and they melted. They melted all over my soundtrack to Star Wars. And for years, I still had that. It was a Darth Vader, the Santa Star Trek album that opened up. And on the back, if you turn it over, there was a melted crayon, which was a scar from the road to Tennessee. Most of the trip was okay. If you've ever driven cross country, driving through, California into Arizona, it's gorgeous. Arizona's beautiful. And then, you get to Arkansas, Oklahoma, and then you get to the panhandle of Texas. And the panhandle of Texas, there is nothing to look at, nothing to see, nothing but flat land as far as your eye can see, like Old Man Peabody. And the only bright spot on that trip is stopping for gas and the childhood joy of getting a Coke out of a machine. And remember the machines with those big plastic buttons, those big plastic squares that said Coke or Pepsi? And you take it and you push the whole thing in, and the machine would and the drink would fall down. Or the ones that were 10 cents, and then the door opened and you pulled the Coke bottle out by its neck. And Pepsi had the same kind of machine. and on the side you pop the bottle open, and the cap would drop in. And there was even a spot for empties if you finished it right there. Stopping at those roadside stands was how you mark the time. Well, we're just driving till the next bathroom break, the next Stuckey's, the next souvenir stand. I bought Coke from a machine. I bought some polished rocks, because when you're in the desert, that's what you buy. You buy a little pouch of polished rocks. And then I got to Tennessee, and I spent the entire summer in Tennessee. I wasn't quite sure what to expect when I got there. These were people I knew. We'd taken many trips, for my mother to go back home for different reasons. But here I was alone, in a state far from home. The biggest shock was the television. None of the channels were on the right channels. None of the stations were where I thought they were going to be. Here in Southern California, back in the 80s, we had 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 28, and 56. And then in other places you go, the channels don't even start till like 17 or 18. This is way before cable. Cable was hard to get back then. Not every neighborhood had access to cable. Some people had those giant satellite dishes, but nothing like that. The first place I stayed at was my Aunt Rita's house. I love Aunt Rita. I loved her husband, Uncle Gene. He passed away a couple years ago. One of the greatest guys ever. Was that summer like a father to me. Taught me things. Showed me how to do things. Just a great, great guy. And I spent 2 or 3 weeks at their house. Getting acclimated to a whole nother way of doing things. They taught me how to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, because children were expected to speak that way in Tennessee. In the South, you said yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. You didn't ask for a Coke. They didn't know what a Coke was. You either asked for a ice-cold pop or an ice-cold Coca-Cola, but they didn't know what Coke was. I found it all so strange. I would flip around on the TV and try to find programs that I recognized. That was the beginning of... It's the first time I'd ever seen WTBS, the Superstation. And they had some sitcoms that I recognized, so I would watch that a lot. They did have a rudimentary cable. They had Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon in 1982 was nothing like you'd recognize now. But they had a show in the morning called Today's Special about a mannequin who would, a guy mannequin that would come to life with the store closed, and they'd have to teach him lessons about life. I watched all these weird shows, but more importantly, my Aunt Rita had a big collection of books, and I spent the majority of my time there reading books. I read all of the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Silver Chair, Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. She also had a huge collection of Hardy Boys mysteries. I read every one of them. If you want to know the secret of the hidden clock, I know the secret of the hidden clock. I read them all. She had a few copies of a book series I recognized called Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. I read all those. I read. And when I wasn't reading, Gene, he either owned and managed or just managed or owned, I don't know. But he was a big muckety-muck at the Lakeshore Marina. And there were many days I would get up early with him and go down in the marina and spend the day at the marina. And oh man, it was the best summer of my life. I learned how to fish. I learned how to, once you caught the fish, take it off the hook and throw it back. And I did that for days. I fished for days off of the pier. I would go into the little convenience shop there, and I could have whatever I wanted. And I discovered a new product called Capri Sun that we did not have in California, and you actually took a straw and drank out of a bag. I discovered a snack cake called the Little Debbie snack cakes that we did not have in California. And Little Debbie had all these different kinds of snack cakes. It was like Hostess, but a little different. And I would get my Little Debbie snack cakes, my Capri Sun, and I would fish off the pier all day. I knew everybody at the marina. They knew me. I was the Yankee from California. That they called me the Yankee from California because of the way I talked. Because they would say, "Morning, it's great to be down at the marina." "Yeah, it's good to be here." "Ooh, what kind of accent is that? Are you Yankee?" I don't know what a Yankee is. Like the baseball player? I guess. I was on the Yankees once in Little League. One day, Gene took me out in a Chris Craft little tiny speedboat, and he let me drive. And at 10 years old, I drove that boat all over the marina. I thought I was King S, man. I was driving a boat. The boat eventually ran out of gas, and we had to. I think a guy towed us in. Somebody that Gene knew towed us to the nearest gas pump, which was at the marina down the way, not the one that we were at. It wasn't the Lakeshore Marina. It was another marina, and we went there, and it was like something out of the Okefenokee swamps. You know, the gas pump was that red metal all rusted out that's rounded at the top and has the dial, ding 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 ding, and we put gas in, and he must have put like $1, and it filled the tank. You know, gas at that point was like 45 cents a gallon, and I just remember going, "Hey, Uncle Gene, what's wrong with their marina? How come it's not like no, just get in the boat and don't be rude." Oh, I learned a lot of civil lessons the summer of 1982. Yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. How to talk to people. How to not be a little S. I learned a lot. And then I was moved around a bit. I spent a few weeks at my cousin Denise's house. Now, Denise had married this rich guy that we knew was a bookie for the mob and ran numbers. But it didn't matter because he told everybody he was in the carpet business. Because you crossed over into Georgia to the border town of Dalton, and Dalton was known as the carpet capital of the country. So anybody in Dalton was into carpeting. So WC was into carpeting. What's W? They call him W. What's W do? Oh, he's into carpeting. Oh, okay. Nobody even questioned it. And they had a gorgeous house. And his daughter was named Nikki, and Nikki and I spent the summer swimming in the pool. So I went from the marina and fishing to a house that had a pool where you got up in the morning about 8:30 in the morning and you went swimming. And you didn't stop swimming till around 7:30 that night, and you came in for dinner exhausted, your eyes red from chlorine, and just completely hollow because you hadn't eaten all day and you've been swimming. Had a big dinner, watched something on TV, went to bed. Next day, repeat. And if I thought the marina was good, the swimming was even better. Because I was 10, I would be 11 in September. This is long before puberty. Long before the specter of girls and dating and all of that comes into play. It was the last time I remember being a kid. It was the last time I remember having only one obligation in life. Have fun. Do things that are fun. So you embrace them. And I swam and I swam and I swam. And the bottom of the pool was not smooth. It was made with little rocks that were embedded. I mean, it was gorgeous to look at. But it wasn't meant to be in all day with wrinkly, waterlogged limbs. And so the only drawback to any of it was my feet were tore up that summer. Blisters, rips, because you're waterlogged and you're scraping. But you know what? I didn't care, because It was the summer of my life. There would be other summers. 84 was a great summer. 85 with Back to the Future was a stellar summer. But as far as being a kid, 1982, man, Coke and Pepsi still came in those giant 16, 18-ounce bottles. You pop one, and you could drink it for an hour. The little ones lasted one sitting. But these big bottles, the kind that you return back to the store for a dime, they lasted all summer. They lasted all day. You grab a Little Debbie snack cake, and there was no Capri Sun at Denise's house. There was bottles of soda. And I even discovered at the store that regionally, Coke and Pepsi sold only in this region a 3-liter bottle. They sell 3 liters out here now, but they're only Shasta. I've never understood why we never got the 3-liter Coke bottle out here. It just seemed like a no-brainer because it was more soda and less time. You needed to go to the store sooner. It lasted longer. But those were amazing. And I swam, and I swam, and I swam. And it was glorious. I mean, you can hear it in my voice, right? It's not fake. And then I spent the last part of the summer at my Aunt Sue's house. Now, Aunt Sue's birthday was just a week apart from mine, so I was kindred spirits with Aunt Sue. And she was married to a guy named Mike. And Mike was a professional chef. And they lived in a big apartment complex. I had gone from Aunt Rita's amazing big house, the kind of house where you walk in and there are a few steps up to the living room and then a giant stairs leading down to what should be the basement, but is actually has a patio door that opens because it's built on a hill, and you're all confused, and it's like a hobbit house, but it's regular size. And Aunt Rita made the greatest biscuits. Oh, my God. Every morning, fresh biscuits from scratch, which have a taste that no fast food or restaurant's ever been able to duplicate. And she made them every day. Sometimes she'd make 2 or 3 batches and take a couple days off, but we always had them. Amazing. I was in Dalton, Georgia for quite a while. And then, again, I moved in with my Aunt Sue. And Aunt Sue lived in Knoxville. And Uncle Mike was the head chef at a restaurant. And the summer just kept getting better in different ways. Living with Aunt Sue, I was alone most of the day because Sue worked, Mike worked, and I was left to my own. I watched TV, but they would leave like $5 for me every few days, and I would take that money and I would walk. I mean, imagine this. In California, where I grew up, I wasn't allowed to walk anywhere. Sometimes we walked to there was a McCoy's Market on the corner. I would walk to McCoy's Market and pick a couple things up. You know, I pick up Shasta soda that we called bell pepper soda and some of those chocolate pies. And not the Hostess ones, the generic ones were 3 for $1. But not a lot of walking. Like I never, growing up, not until high school did I walk to school. My mother didn't trust. We were way too far for the elementary school for me to walk. But in Knoxville, I think I walked 3/4 of a mile to the local convenience store. It was it was called Handy Andy, Handy Andy's Pantry. And I would use the money to get some soda. I'd get the big Coke bottles, and I got these Pac-Man and Donkey Kong game cards that you would scratch off, and it was a game, like how if you scratch the right way you could win the game. I just saw some at Comic-Con last week, and I was like, oh my God, I remember those. The manure, I remember that. The Donkey Kong cards, I remember that. Of course, they were $300 a box at the con. They were probably 50 cents when I bought them. But I would scratch these cards off and drink my soda. Aunt Sue bought me a remote-controlled Jeep that I played with, and it was so much fun. And then it got, like I said, it got better because occasionally I would go with Uncle Mike to his work, to the restaurant. Now, when I was a kid, restaurants were Bob's Big Boy, Sizzler, We didn't go to any fancy restaurants at all. I didn't even know what a fancy restaurant was. So when I was taken with Uncle Mike to this restaurant and told they only opened for dinner, I didn't know what that was. They didn't even open the doors till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. So Mike spent the day prepping all of the food that they were going to have the rest of the night. And he would cut all the meat himself and then wrap the fillets in bacon for cooking. I mean, he was a master chef, and watching was amazing. And then the perk of that was the bar of the restaurant had a cocktail table Miss Pac-Man. And when I got there, they keyed it so that I could play all day, as long as I wanted. Now, I was a video game addict in 1982. Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, Star Castles, Miss Pac-Man, all these games. I couldn't get enough of them. Every penny I had was spent playing these games. Every quarter. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. So being sat in front of one that was free play, oh, I never wanted to leave. And they taught me how to use that bar gun. You know, the one that you put ice in a cup and then you can shoot either Coke or Sprite or Diet. Did they have Diet Coke? I don't think they did. But like, I would get behind the bar, scoop the ice out, and spray my own drink at 10. It was so much fun. Eventually, the rest of the crew members at the restaurant decided to challenge me to a Miss Pac-Man off. So it was a tournament, and I killed them all. They had no idea anybody could play Miss Pac-Man like that. And, it was so much. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. It's completely true. And we would eat the food at the restaurant. It was the best food I'd ever had. That's where I learned from Uncle Mike. If you're going to have a steak and you're going to pay a lot of money for it, it better be filet mignon. And I ate a lot of filet mignon that summer. I mean, can you imagine a summer of all the Coke you can drink, Little Debbie cakes, Capri Sun drinks, and filet mignon? I never wanted to come home. I never wanted to go home. This was the greatest summer I'd ever had. And then, Aunt Sue and Uncle Mike decided to take me to the movies. Now, I didn't care about going to the movies back then because there was nothing out I wanted to see at that point. I was busy at home. Uncle Mike had a whole set of little tiny army men, like not the plastic ones I played with. These were much smaller army men. And they had helicopters and tanks and tents that he called bivouacs and all these little things. And we would play forever war on the table. Like, who needs to go anywhere? But they took me to see E.T. I went under protest. I'm not going to see this movie. And I remember sitting there. There were 3 older ladies behind me who by the end were a mess. They were crying so loudly. And there I am holding back tears. Why does E.T. have to leave? And why was Carl telling me it's so good, this movie? It's not better than Star Wars, but it's so good. I mean, I was so conflicted because E.T.'s a masterpiece of filmmaking. But I was determined. I was not going to let it be better than Star Wars. And then at the height of the summer, when I thought there's no way it can possibly get any better, they took me to the 1982 World's Fair.
From the red earth of Mexico, it's coming. From China, a piece of the Great Wall, it's coming. From every corner of the earth, it's coming. And it's coming soon. You've got to be there.
Point me in the right direction. I'll be there.
I'll be there.
At
be there.
I'll be there.
I'll be there.
I'll be there.
We want to see how history is being made in Tennessee. You got to be there.
Columbia, you have okay to land in Knoxville. Roger, Houston, we'll be there.
The 1982 World's Fair. You got to be there.
My mother had taken us to the L.A. County Fair my whole life. I knew it backwards and forwards. I loved going to see the train display. And I never cared about rides. It was mostly about exhibits and seeing all the amazing things. So I kind of knew what the World's Fair was. They certainly ran enough commercials on Knoxville television for it. But going to it was unbelievable. I saw things I will never see again. I saw my first robot there. Heinz had a robot walking around talking to people, and he gave me a little Heinz pickle pin that I still have to this day. It's very tiny. I got to see the Chinese terracotta warriors. Remember when they unearthed those? They actually had some at the fair, and it was like, it's mind-blowing. The fair, the World's Fair, the World's Expo used to be where all of the nations of the world got together and showed off what they were capable of for the benefit of mankind. I mean, that's where all of the major breakthroughs had come from. You know, silly stuff like the Ferris wheel or the ice cream cone. It's a Small World, the Omnimover, right? Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Primeval World. The fair was where Edison showed off electricity to the masses and where ideas were spread around the world. Now, in modern times, there's no need for that. And that's why the World Fairs went out of fashion, because they were very expensive to put on. Here in America, they would create entire cities to house and put on these things, temporary cities. The Chicago one, the famed White City, was made of plaster and disintegrated, but it held long enough for the fair. The 1982 Knoxville World's Fair had the Sun Sphere. Most people know it because Bart and his friends knock it over in an episode of The Simpsons, and it's full of wigs. When I went, it was a restaurant, and it was very expensive to go up there, so we actually didn't go up to the top of the Sun Sphere to look around. But we did everything else. We did all the pavilions. We ate. We looked at shows. I never really cared about rides. There weren't any rides that I was dying to go on. I was soaking up education. I bought souvenirs for my entire family at that fair. I gave my mother World's Fair dealy boppers with the symbol of the fair on a giant spring. I had a tray. I had a Coke. I think I had an apron and a keychain. Somewhere in my stuff, I have the ticket. I have a ticket for the 1982 World's Fair. And for a kid like me, who I wasn't into sports, I hadn't yet figured out how much I loved the movies. I liked learning. I liked going to school. So going to the World's Fair was like school that was fun, where everybody there was excited that you were there and wanted to show you these amazing things. And I've never forgotten that trip to the World's Fair. It's something that it is just gone. You can go to your local county fair, but it's not, the guy selling bags of nuts, 3 for $10, is not the same as the terracotta army. It just isn't. It just isn't. It was amazing. I was going to go through a list of movies from 1982, because 1982 was a unbelievable year. It's considered one of the greatest film years of all time, of Blade Runner, Tron, Wrath of Khan. The list goes on and on and on. E.T., Annie, amazing, gigantic movies that have stood the test of time. You could argue that more movies from 1982 have lasted longer than almost any year in cinema. That's amazing. Tootsie, these are huge movies. Go to IMDb and put in movies of 1982, and the list is astounding. Sure, there's some clunkers in there, but you still know them. Movies like The Dark Crystal that are, Dark Crystal's getting a sequel at this point. A sequel. 37 years later. That's amazing. 1982 was the greatest summer of my childhood life. My relatives in Tennessee treated me better than I had ever hoped to be treated. I learned to read entire books in a day. I saw terracotta warriors from another continent. I swam until I became a fish. And the summer seemed to last forever. And that's not just hyperbole. It actually did. Because what I didn't know going on back home was that I had no way to get back home. Nobody was willing to drive me back home. And my mother could not afford a plane ticket. So I was having the greatest summer of my life. And my mother was at home terrified because there was no way to get me home. They weren't going to put a 10-year-old on a Greyhound bus for $30 and go cross country. That's not going to happen. You get off the bus at some podunk station and you're vanished forever. My mother knew that. The only way I was getting home was somebody was either going to drive me or she was going to sell something to get a plane ticket. And so what happened was, and I didn't know about this till years later, was there was a guy at my church named Jim Young. He was the nicest guy I'd ever known. Just gentle. Like imagine Fred Gwynn from Pet Sematary, but take out all the horrible Indian burial ground stuff. Just a really nice, gentle guy. Does it make sense? Can you strip that character of all the malevolence and still have a good character? Yeah, I think you can. Just Jim Young was the nicest guy. You don't know this until you're older. The people that shape you and make you who you are do not become important till literally it's almost too late. And what I didn't know was that during, church has stages where you come in, there's the welcome, the benediction, there's a hymn, there's the call to worship, there's the welcoming of new people. God, I'm doing all this from memory. I had no idea I could remember this much. There was the children's time where the children would come up and then they'd be, the minister would say something to them and then they'd be excused to go to Bible study. That's what I did every week. I would mark it like, well, how long is it? It's going to take, 25 minutes to get to the to being excused. There was that real vague that say preacher delivers sermon, and sometimes there was a title to the sermon, and sometimes there wasn't. But you knew the sermon was going to be like 30 minutes because they were going to drive whatever point they had home. Then there was another hymn. Sometimes the choir sang by themselves. Then there was the final word from the preacher. Then we were excused to go to the social hall for punch and cookies where everybody did fellowship for like an hour. And my mother would get me home from church about 1:30 after a trip to the liquor store because she had promised me Star Wars cards. So during one of those parts where they're either passing the collection plate around or welcoming new people, or any announcements for the church, or the announcement. Remember the prayer chain? We're adding people to the prayer chain. We're taking somebody off the prayer chain because they've gotten better, or they've passed. Jim Young stood up in that church, and he said, "You all know Jackie Smith. She's the church treasurer, and she's a member of the church choir." And I'm about to start crying because it's such an amazing moment. Jackie's son is in Tennessee, and he has no way home. And I'm calling on the people of this church to donate a couple of dollars to buy a plane ticket to bring this child back. And when my mother left the church that day, she had enough money to buy me a plane ticket home. I didn't know this till years later. She kept it private from anybody in the family. All I know is that I was briefed on getting on the plane, and they were going to tell those flight attendants that I was traveling alone. They were going to take care of me, and I was scared to death to fly on a plane, and the flight attendants made it all great, and I got a pair of plastic wings, and I got to go in the cockpit. And the people of the church bought that ticket because my mother couldn't afford it. And Jim Young got up and made that announcement. And when I got back home, I was a different person. I was more polite. I said, yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And my mother was floored that I think I was gone about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. And I came back a different kid, and I was more thankful for things. And this is before, before Mr. Benton, before Girls, before Back to the Future. I was just a little 10-year-old kid, about to turn 11, and about to go into the 6th grade. And that was the summer of 1982. And I dedicate this episode to my kids, Luna, Austin, and Josie. I hope that you have your summer of 1982 and your summer where you look back and you go, that was it. That was the moment. That was the moment where things clicked in and became real, and I was no longer just a stupid kid running around in the dirt. And I was a kid that cared about things and remembered things and understood the importance of things. And Jim Young, if you're listening wherever you are, I know you passed a long time ago, but though you're no longer here, the people you affected and the people you touched, we live on. And in that case, you live on.